11:33 p.m. Indian Ocean. Diego Garcia. The atoll sits at 7 degrees south latitude in the middle of the Indian Ocean, 1,600 kilometers south of India, 1,800 kilometers east of the African coast, and equidistant from the Persian Gulf and the Malacca Strait, in a way that no other landmass in the ocean achieves. The U.S. military facility on the island, officially Naval Support Facility Diego Garcia, operated under a bilateral agreement with the United Kingdom that governed the British Indian Ocean Territory, hosted one of the most consequential strategic infrastructure concentrations in the American military's global architecture. B-2. Spirit stealth bombers had operated from Diego Garcia's 11,000-foot runway. B-52s had staged through it for operations across the Middle East and the Pacific. SSBNs used its deep-water anchorage. Pre-positioned maritime equipment for a Marine Expeditionary Brigade was stored at the facility. The U.S. Air Force's space surveillance network had a sensor element on the atoll. Every major U.S. military operation touching the Indian Ocean region had flowed through or been supported by Diego Garcia in the preceding 4 decades. The facility's legal foundation had eroded on a schedule that everyone involved had known about for years. The British Indian Ocean Territory's legal status had been contested since Mauritius gained independence in 1968. The Chagosian islanders, who had been removed from the territory in the late 1960s and early 1970s to enable the U.S. military facility's construction, had pursued legal remedies through British and international courts for 5 decades. In November 2024, the United Kingdom and Mauritius reached a sovereignty agreement under which the United Kingdom would cede sovereignty over the Chagos archipelago to Mauritius in exchange for a 99-year lease of Diego Garcia to continue the U.S. military presence. The agreement had been contested in the UK Parliament, challenged in British courts, and reviewed by the incoming U.S. administration, which had expressed significant reservations about the terms. By the time the agreement's formal implementation date arrived, the legal and political status of the facility was in a condition that no single government could describe with confidence. Into that uncertainty, at 11:33 p.m. on a night when the Indian Ocean was at force sea state, and the Diego Garcia anchorage held 3 U.S. Navy vessels and 1 prepositioned maritime ship, a planned Type 055 guided missile destroyer and 2 Type 052D destroyers completed a transit maneuver that placed them in a triangular formation, 23 nautical miles south of the atoll's southern tip, inside the 24 nautical mile contiguous zone but outside the 12 nautical mile territorial waters, and came to a halt. The formation stopped. It did not approach further. It did not transmit hostile communications. It did not activate weapons radar. It deployed 2 small rigid inflatable boats from the Type 055 starboard side, which proceeded northward at low speed on a course that would take them toward Diego Garcia's southeastern anchorage entrance. The boats carried 12 PLA Navy personnel in naval uniforms, without personal weapons, and 1 civilian official of the PRC Ministry of Foreign Affairs carrying a sealed diplomatic document. The document, as the accompanying radio transmission on the international distress frequency made clear at 11:34 and 12 seconds p.m., was addressed to the commanding officer of Naval Support Facility Diego Garcia and concerned a matter of Chinese government policy regarding the Chagos sovereignty transition. The NSF Diego Garcia duty officer registered the approaching boats at 11:34:28 a.m. and transmitted an alert to the Pacific Fleet Command at Pearl Harbor and to the Chief of Naval Operations duty officer in Washington. The alert described what it showed: 3 planned surface combatants in the contiguous zone, 2 small craft approaching the southern anchorage entrance carrying PLA Navy and PRC Foreign Ministry personnel, and a diplomatic document that the approaching party had announced on an open frequency was being formally delivered. The duty officer requested guidance. The guidance he needed was not tactical. The guidance he needed was legal diplomatic and political simultaneously, in a situation where the legal and diplomatic framework governing the facility itself was in a transitional state that no one had completed processing. The Mauritius Sovereignty Agreement had been initialed but not ratified by the UK Parliament. The 99-year lease that would have formally continued US basing rights had been signed by both parties but was under legal challenge in the UK courts. The facility was, at 11:33 p.m., operating under the authority of an agreement whose predecessor had technically expired and whose successor had not achieved full legal force. The United States had continued operating the facility on the basis of a general understanding with both the UK and Mauritius that operations would continue pending the agreement's legal resolution. That understanding had not been codified in any instrument that the approaching PRC Foreign Ministry officials' diplomatic document could be measured against. The physical layout of Diego Garcia had been a source of quiet military planning concern for several years before the sovereignty agreement was reached. The atoll's geography, a 37-kilometer horseshoe-shaped landmass enclosing a lagoon, made its outer coastline accessible from multiple approach vectors while concentrating its most critical infrastructure in a small geographic area. The runway, the fuel storage, the prepositioned equipment berths, and the communications infrastructure were all within a 6-kilometer radius of the central facility area. An atoll could not be defended in the way a continental base could be defended. There was no depth, no terrain to use for concealment, and limited perimeter. The facility's security assumptions had historically been built around the Indian Ocean's distance from any adversary's power projection capability and the U.S. Navy's ability to detect any approaching force with sufficient warning to activate a response. Those assumptions had been built on a geography that had not changed and a military balance that had. The plan's ability to put 3 surface combatants in the contiguous zone of Diego Garcia at 11:33 p.m. was the operational expression of a capability that had not existed 10 years earlier. The warning that the capability provided was not kinetic. It was temporal. At Pearl Harbor, Pacific Fleet Command transmitted a preliminary assessment to Washington at 11:37 p.m. Planned surface formation in contiguous zone, approaching small craft with diplomatic personnel, no hostile indicators, no weapons activation. Situation categorized as a diplomatic contact requiring immediate guidance from the National Security Council. The assessment also transmitted a position tracking update. The Type 055 formation had not moved since the boats departed. It was holding position 23 nautical miles south of the atoll. What the approaching diplomat's sealed document contained was not yet known. The radio transmission had described it as concerning Chinese government policy regarding the Chagos sovereignty transition and the future status of foreign military facilities on the territory. China had not been a party to the UK-Mauritius agreement. China had not been asked to be a party. China had issued a formal diplomatic note to both the UK and Mauritius governments 4 months earlier expressing the view that the establishment of a 99-year foreign military lease on territory, newly under Mauritian sovereignty, was inconsistent with the principle that decolonization should not perpetuate colonial military arrangements. The note had been received, acknowledged, and not acted upon, the sealed document being delivered by boat. At 11:44 p.m., the time at which the rigid inflatables reached the southern anchorage entrance and requested permission to land through the harbor control frequency, was the operational follow-on to that diplomatic note. China was exercising the right to deliver a formal governmental communication directly to the facility's commanding officer, on the basis that the facility was operating on territory whose sovereignty question directly implicated Chinese foreign policy positions. During a window in which the facility's legal authorization framework was in transition, the NSF Diego Garcia commanding officer received permission from Pacific Fleet Command at 11:47 p.m. to allow the landing of the diplomatic party at the southern pier under security escort, receive the document, and await further guidance. The decision to allow the landing had been made in 3 minutes and 22 seconds of telephone consultation between the facility commander, Pacific Fleet Command, the CNO duty officer, and the NSC duty officer. It had been made because the alternative, physically preventing the landing of unarmed PRC diplomatic personnel attempting to deliver a document to a U.S. military facility, was a kinetic and legal action that none of the parties on those calls were prepared to authorize in 3 minutes and 22 seconds without considerably more legal and political processing than the timeline allowed. The PRC Foreign Ministry official and 12 PLA Navy personnel landed at the southern pier at 11:52 p.m. under escort of 6 U.S. security personnel. The official presented the sealed document to the NSF Diego Garcia executive officer. The commanding officer had remained at the command center at 11:53:14 p.m. The document was transmitted to Pacific Fleet Command in Washington via secure imagery at 11:54 and 7 seconds p.m. Its contents were processed by NSC staff beginning at 11:56 p.m. While that processing was beginning, the second element of the Chinese operation was activating. At 11:58 p.m., the Mauritius government transmitted a formal diplomatic note to the U.S. Embassy in Port Louis. The note had been prepared in coordination with the Chinese government, as subsequent analysis of its drafting timeline would confirm, and its transmission at 11:58 p.m., 5 minutes after the PRC document was landed at Diego Garcia, was not coincidental. The Mauritius note stated that pending final ratification of the UK-Mauritius agreement and the commencement of the 99-year lease, the Mauritius government was asserting sovereign authority over the Chagos archipelago and was formally requesting that the United States provide a timeline for the transition of facility operations to arrangements consistent with Mauritius sovereignty. The note did not demand immediate withdrawal. It requested a timeline. The language was polite and technically precise. Its operational effect was to create a formal record that the territorial sovereign had made a sovereignty assertion that was on file with the U.S. government at exactly the moment when a Chinese diplomatic document on the same subject had just been delivered inside the facility. The coordination was visible once both documents were side by side, which happened in Washington at 12:04 a.m. The PRC document had been delivered at 11:53 p.m. The Mauritius note had been transmitted at 11:58 p.m., 5 minutes apart. Two documents from two governments making complementary assertions about the legal status of the facility where one of those documents had just been physically delivered by a diplomatic party escorted by 12 PLA Navy personnel. The intelligence community's reconstruction of the operations preparation timeline, compiled over the following 2 weeks, identified that the coordination between the PRC Foreign Ministry and the Mauritius government had begun at least 6 weeks before the planned formation appeared in the contiguous zone. The diplomatic note that Mauritius had transmitted to the U.S. Embassy at 11:58 p.m. had been drafted with PRC Foreign Ministry input that the reconstruction identified through linguistic analysis of terminology that appeared in both the Mauritius note and a PRC internal document inadvertently included in a document production for an unrelated diplomatic proceeding. The planned formation's transit from Sanya Naval Base in Hainan Province had been tracked by U.S. satellite from its departure 4 days earlier. Its course through the Malacca Strait and across the Indian Ocean had been assessed as a routine transit toward the Eastern Indian Ocean Patrol Zone that the plan had been using for exercise operations. The formation had not transmitted any communication that distinguished its transit from a standard patrol. The document delivery had been prepared, coordinated, and executed with a level of operational security that had prevented the intelligence community from identifying the operation's true purpose. Until the formation stopped in the contiguous zone and the boats were deployed, the NSC's legal counsel transmitted a preliminary assessment at 12:11 a.m. The situation constituted a coordinated Chinese-Mauritius diplomatic operation. designed to accelerate the political timeline on the Diego Garcia basing arrangement's legal resolution. Using the physical presence of the planned surface formation and the in-person delivery of the Chinese diplomatic document to create a sense of immediacy and physical reality that diplomatic notes delivered through conventional channels would not have generated. The assessment identified three immediate concerns: the planned formation's continued presence in the contiguous zone, the legal exposure created by the facility operating under an unratified agreement in the face of a formal Mauritius sovereignty assertion, and the precedent established by allowing PLA Navy personnel to land at a U.S. military facility. The planned formation had not moved. At 12:14 a.m., it had been in the contiguous zone for 41 minutes and had not activated any weapons system, had not moved closer, and had not transmitted anything other than standard maritime navigation communications. Its presence was the background condition of the operation, the physical weight that gave the diplomatic documents their operational significance. It was not threatening in the conventional sense. It was present in a way that could not be ignored. At 12:22 a.m., the NSC issued its first operational guidance to Pacific Fleet Command and to the U.S. Embassy in Port Louis. The guidance was carefully constructed around three simultaneous tracks. Track 1, USS Carl Vinson, operating in the Arabian Sea 1,800 nautical miles northwest of Diego Garcia, was directed to proceed at maximum speed toward the Indian Ocean region, not toward Diego Garcia specifically, and not with any declared intent regarding the planned formation. Maximum speed at 1,800 nautical miles was approximately 60 hours of transit. The direction was a signal about intent, not an immediate operational response. Track 2. The U.S. ambassador in Port Louis was directed to request an urgent meeting with the Mauritius Prime Minister and to transmit a formal diplomatic response stating that the U.S. recognized the sovereign rights of Mauritius under the evolving basing arrangement, but that the United States assessed the formal timeline for transition of facility operations to be governed by the terms of the agreement under negotiation rather than by unilateral assertion. Track 3. The State Department's Bureau of East Asian and Pacific Affairs was directed to transmit a formal diplomatic note to the PRC Ministry of Foreign Affairs, stating that the physical delivery of a diplomatic communication to a U.S. military facility by PLA Navy personnel was an unprecedented action that the United States regarded as inconsistent with normal diplomatic practice, and that the United States was formally requesting the immediate withdrawal of the planned formation from Diego Garcia's contiguous zone. None of the three tracks involved a kinetic response. None of the three tracks involved any direct action regarding the planned formation beyond a diplomatic note requesting its withdrawal. The kinetic response capacity existed. B-2S were based at Diego Garcia. The SSBNS in the anchorage were operational, and within the 60-hour transit window, the Carl Vinson provided a substantial additional response option. But at 12:22 a.m., 49 minutes after the planned formation had appeared in the contiguous zone, the situation did not meet the threshold for a kinetic response because the situation had not been a kinetic act. It had been a physical statement, a presence operation combined with a diplomatic delivery designed to force a timeline on a legal question that the United States had been managing through deliberate ambiguity. The three diplomatic tracks that the NSC had activated were each operating on different timelines with different expected outcomes. The USS Carl Vinson's 60-hour transit was visible to the plan through satellite observation. They would know within hours that the carrier had been directed toward the Indian Ocean, and the signal it sent was deliberate. The U.S. retained the ability to concentrate significant naval power near Diego Garcia within a time horizon that the planned formation's departure had not precluded. The U.S. ambassador's urgent meeting request with the Mauritius Prime Minister was the track most likely to produce immediate operational effect if Mauritius could be separated from the Chinese coordination. The simultaneous nature of the two documents' claims would be exposed and the diplomatic weight of each would be reduced. The formal note to the PRC Ministry of Foreign Affairs was the track least likely to produce immediate response, but most important for establishing the legal record that any subsequent international legal proceeding would reference. All three tracks were running simultaneously, each staffed by people who understood that the others were running and that their track's outcome would affect the others. The deliberate ambiguity had been the policy. The policy had produced the vulnerability that the Chinese operation had exploited. A facility operating under an unratified agreement on territory whose sovereignty was in formal transition in a region where a major power had formally expressed its opposition to the arrangement's perpetuation was a facility whose legal foundation could be subjected to exactly the kind of coordinated diplomatic operational pressure that had arrived at 11:33 p.m. At 12:44 a.m., the plan formation transmitted a departure advisory on the harbor control frequency and began moving southeast at 12 knots. The operation had lasted 1 hour and 11 minutes from the moment the formation stopped in the contiguous zone to the moment it departed. The PRC Foreign Ministry official and the 12 PLA Navy personnel had returned to the Type 055 at 12:39 a.m. The document had been delivered. The Mauritius note had been transmitted. The plan formation had demonstrated that it could reach Diego Garcia's contiguous zone, conduct an in-person diplomatic delivery inside the facility under escort, and depart without firing a round or activating a weapon system. Time from plan formation arrival in contiguous zone to departure, 1 hour 11 minutes. PLA Navy and PRC diplomatic personnel inside NSF Diego Garcia, 12 minutes. U.S. kinetic response, none. USS Carl Vinson directed to transit 60 hours from Diego Garcia. Plan formation weapons activation, 0. Diplomatic documents delivered, 2. Coordinated within 5 minutes of each other. NSC tracks activated, 3. None kinetic. Legal status of facilities basing agreement. Under review, unratified. Mauritius sovereignty assertion, formally filed, U.S. response pending. The B-2s on Diego Garcia had not been armed. The SSBNs in the anchorage had not changed their status. No interceptor had been assigned to the approaching boats. The 6 U.S. security personnel who had escorted the diplomatic party had carried their standard sidearms. The most consequential U.S. military facility in the Indian Ocean had received a formal diplomatic communication delivered by PLA Navy personnel at 11:53 p.m. Processed it through the National Security Council, activated 3 diplomatic tracks, and directed a carrier strike group to begin a 60-hour transit, all without a single system engaging a single target. The Chinese operation had not been a military operation in the kinetic sense. It had been a demonstration that the tools of sovereignty, diplomatic documents, legal assertions, formal notes, and the physical presence of capable naval vessels at legally permissible range could be coordinated to produce strategic effects on a U.S. military facility without triggering the response architecture that the U.S. military had designed for military operations. The facility was operational. It was also, for the first time in 4 decades, the subject of a formal and publicly filed challenge to the legal basis of its continued operation. The 99-year lease's ratification timeline became the most urgent item on the US-UK bilateral agenda the following morning.